And welcome to this Lloyd's Register and West of England P&I Club webinar supported by Maritime London, exploring how the ESG agenda is changing stakeholder discussions and commercial expectations. My name is Josh Standerwick, I'm Chief Executive of Maritime London, and I am very pleased to be moderating today's session. I think it's fair to say that every facet of the commercial shipping value chain is now exposed to the ESG agenda. However, in a market where there are multiple stakeholders on and offshore with differing expectations and requirements, and with perhaps a particular focus on the social and governance side of ESG, no clear barometer as to what good looks like, how do market participants ensure compliance against what could be described as a rather subjective regime? Furthermore, focusing on the E of ESG, while the current regulation is clear in the short term, there is uncertainty about IMO midterm measures and, I suppose, for the potential of unilateral decarbonisation pathways causing a fragmented market. Furthermore, in the industry, we often only consider primary emitters and the need to comply, and the need to comply with legislation specifically targeted at the industry. Increasingly, though, we must also consider the fact that we are now seeing major shippers outline decarb trajectories significantly more ambitious than the industry pathways. And one can see a world where this trend can only continue if the industry does not adopt Paris Climate Accord aligned strategies. Today, we will explore how the market is being supported through this uncertainty and whether the current position of the industry is having a real-term effect on investor sentiment. Recognising the breadth of this subject, joining me on the virtual roundtable today, we have representatives from various facets of the industry. Firstly, we have NIKOS BENETIS, Technical Director and ESG Lead at Hayfin Capital Management and Greenheart Management Company. We have EPAMEINONDAS CHANROS, Director of Transformation and Risk at Attica Group. GINA PANAYIOTOU, ESG Manager at the West of England P&I Club. And GAUTAM PURI, Vice President Business Advisory and Energy Transition Advisory Services at Lloyd's Register. Just a little more from me. Attendees will have the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. However, due to my technological ineptitude, could I please ask the questions to be submitted under the Q&A tab and not the chat tab? This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to attendees after the session. And lastly, we do have a poll question, which is going live very shortly. And we will be asking the same question again 10 minutes before the end to see how perceptions have changed as a consequence of what you have heard today. Right, we only have an hour and we have an awful lot to cover. So without any further ado, we will get cracking. And Gina, I want to start with you. And I think your profile within the industry is testament to this. The discussion within the market around ESG has become, if you like, omnipresent at conferences and industry fora over the past 2 or 3 years. However, sort of beyond the environmental regulatory requirements, have we seen a significant shift in the market in respect to the social and governance pillars?
Yes, thanks for that, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks to Maritime London and Lloyd's Register for working with West to put this together. The short answer to your question, if the S and G is becoming more important, is definitely yes. That's a very short question, and I think one of the main reasons I'm here today. So this shift that we're seeing in stakeholder expectations and requirements. So obviously the E part of the ESG is on heightened focus because there's a fast approaching deadline with the climate change, and we're all well aware of that. Plus the fact that solutions for decarbonizing our fleets are quite unclear, uncertain, not widely available. We don't have the infrastructures in place. So obviously that's the main focus at the moment. But I think especially over the past year or months, especially, we are seeing this shift on true welfare and health and talent attraction, both on shore and ashore. Gender equality issues are on the forefront and have been for a while. And it's also becoming increasingly important in respect to governance on who leads and how, how they're raising these issues in board agendas. So I think this is quite positive because I always like to say that the three have to fall together. You can't really separate them. You can't take one part of the equation. It's just not going to work. It won't be successful. And I think a clear illustration is that solutions for decarbonization require innovation and talent and diversity. And the only way to do that is to focus on the S, right? And then when it comes to governance, I mean, in shipping, we're seeing this rise of autonomous vessels and AI. And in mainstream media, there's thousands of experts demanding for a pause on AI and how it's evolving. And a main part of that is that because it's not properly governed. So I think it's quite clear how all of these tie together. And we're seeing also increased regulation from the EU. There's a new directive coming into place, the CSRD, which will be affecting how we report on all aspects, the E, the S, and the G. Financing is also taking into consideration. I mean, a few weeks ago, we also saw a loan that was related to gender equality targets, and that was a voluntary move from one of the shipping companies. And also the United Nations in the last COP who took a stance to zero tolerance to greenwashing. So I think all of these together clearly show that all elements of ESG are definitely coming on the forefront of board agendas and beyond.
So just to build on that a little bit, in your view, you think that in actual fact, the decarbonisation agenda within the industry is driving the social and governance agenda. And do you think that's largely because, maybe Nikos, you could come in here on this as well. Do you think that's largely because of the need for the industry to attract new capital, which has additional requirements added to it that perhaps traditional providers within the market haven't stipulated previously?
I think there's a definite element there, Josh. The capital markets, the investment, the financing of shipping, the traditional finance, as we used to call it, although that's already a very old way of suggesting the banks have removed themselves, as you like, and the alternative financiers, and again I do apostrophe because they're not alternative anymore, they're quite well established, obviously take ESG, and as GINA stipulated, for us here, E, S and G are equivalent, right? They're as important. If you don't have the right governance, and if you're not looking after the people, and if you're not training the people and not attracting the right people, then the E won't happen by itself. So yes, absolutely, it's part of the mix. It's part of the new mix.
So, and again, I think how do I put this? I think it's fair to say that. So, I mean, firstly, let's talk about Hayfin and Greenheart a little bit, and maybe you can just explain a little bit about that relationship.
Just to explain why I'm on the panel, right? And justify ourselves. So Hayfin is one of Europe's leading alternative asset managers. Founded in 2009, circa 40 billion euros invested over those years across about 450 companies, debt and equity, and high yield is the strategy. Maritime is one of the three dedicated pillars within Hayfin. We have real estate, we have healthcare, and maritime. So we have a dedicated team in-house of very knowledgeable and very experienced investment team. And then Greenheart is the UK-based ship management company of Hayfin Group. And we provide the full operation commercial services, management services, and an overview of the technical services as well. And as you can imagine, and relevant to what we're discussing, my time is very heavily consumed with the whole ESG topic. Both on a daily basis in terms of what we do with our technical managers, plus, we are very proud members of the Global Maritime Forum and within the other associations that we're partners to. And again, just to give a picture of how seriously Hayfin takes ESG, it's fully committed to investing responsibly. It has an ESG committee that comprises of senior management, both in the business side, the legal side, and the finance side. And we are signatories of PRI, of the Alternative Credit Council, of the UK Stewardship Code, which all sort of promote the responsible investment. And we and the Maritime team are aligned as well to SFDR Article 8. So the regulation, if you like, the EU regulation promoting responsible in terms of ESG, E or S or G, or a combination of all those. So we have to recognize, if you like, I'll take it back a bit, that we are very much involved. We talk to the investors continuously, and our main investors are North American and European. I know you were going to ask where these investors are coming from. And although there are barriers, although there are regulatory barriers, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure, shipping is a very attractive asset type. And I think, if I may say so at this early stage, I think we have a tendency to put ourselves down as an industry, but I think we are doing a lot. ESG was first mentioned, I think, in 2007 or 2004. 2004, it was an acronym in the finance sector, a piece of jargon they were using. And look at us so many years onwards, where it's become a daily topic for all of us. So I'll get into that more, if you like, later, but that's who Hayfin is. This is who we are, Greenheart. We manage and operate and own a fleet of second-hand vessels currently, and that's relevant to our discussion because we firmly believe that second-hand or older vessels are here to stay for a longer time than may be usual because of lack of investment over the last few years in both infrastructure and new builds for many reasons. So our passion is, how can we improve those vessels?
So just to go a bit deeper on that, Nikos, and so you have an investor pool. A lot of them perhaps haven't traditionally had an exposure to the shipping industry.
Yep.
But you tend to feel that the ESG credentials of our industry are comparable to the other areas of industry that your investors may be looking at.
I think you have a different pool of investors. Every investor is different, Josh. Yeah. It's fair to say, and that's no nuclear science here. And ESG sits at different levels within their agenda. But us as Hayfin, as the managers of what we're going to invest in, ultimately, we find it very useful to explain, to suggest, to promote what we are going to do. So our commitment. And therefore, we encourage these discussions further with our investors. But I think I have not seen an investor that has come back to me saying we're missing something within the shipping industry. We have a lot of conventions, we have regulations, we have a lot of things in place, a lot of procedures, policies that cover a lot of aspects, a lot of questions that other asset types may or may not have.
Yeah. And EPAMEINONDAS, moving on to you, I mean, Attica is an interesting case study within ESG and shipping because unlike, the majority of the industry, Attica is exclusively public facing, if you like. I mean, your charterers are your passengers, I suppose. And I think to start off with, I'd like to ask, to what extent are your clients, if you like, influencing the ESG agenda within your business?
As we said, we are a case study, and it's nice to be a case study, to tell you the truth. We are a ferry company, and we have this unique characteristic to connect Greece, Greek islands with mainland Greece, and Greece with Italy. For those who do not know us, we have 3 brands, Blue Star Ferries, Super Fast Ferries, and Hellenic Seaways. and I'm pretty certain that more than 10% of the attendants have traveled with us. That shows that we have clients, we have passengers, we are public face, and apart from having passengers, we are listed also on the stock exchange. So for Attica, and I want to get to that, I will start from the end. For us, clients equals community. And why is that? Because, as I said, we are connecting mainland Greece with the islands, and Greece in total with Europe. So for us, this is something very important, and we feel that our clients, our passengers, is the whole community that we serve. Okay, and Attica Group has started the whole thing. ESG for us is something as an acronym new, meaning we had it 3 years ago. The last 15 years we are doing corporate responsibility. Okay, we are one of the first maritime ferry company in the world that issued a corporate responsibility report 15 years ago. According to GRI standards, we have a corporate responsibility team dedicated to those issues the last 12 years. And for us, it is part of the business. Okay, we do that as part of our day-to-day. And we focus on all three axes, environment, social, and governance. And because we have so much direct connection with our clients, with the community, we feel that we must give back what we are getting. It may seem, what I'm saying, a bit, let's say, romantic, but actually this is how we operate. Okay, and because all this have started to be in fashion the last 3 or 4 years, and everybody is assuming that they will get better credit terms, loan terms, that if they are being involved in ESG. But we are doing it the last 15 years, waiting for nothing back, but giving back and having good relationships with the community. So how it affects us, to answer the question, 100%. For us in the ferry industry, and I'm not speaking only about Attica Group, I think this relates to the whole ferry industry in Europe and across the world. How our passengers feel about our corporate responsibility and ESG performance affects us 100%.
Yeah, and I think so. To explore a bit further in that, do you feel that the expectations of your passengers has changed drastically over the past 5 years as you've gone on that journey beyond CSR to ESG, I suppose? And is that driving the decision making within Attica, or is it perhaps the top-down pressures, if you like, that come as a consequence of being a listed entity, etc., etc.?
We work the other way around, meaning we are trying to bring knowledge to our passengers. Meaning, okay, they have their needs, the community has its needs, but we are trying to educate them, because this is the way it goes. You know, we are speaking with our stakeholders all the time. Okay, one of our stakeholders is the community, and we are speaking with them every day, sort of matter of speaking. The point is that we try to educate them on those matters, and not that just the community, the whole stakeholder cycle. But the point is, we communicate with them, we ask them what they would like, what they need, what they feel about corporate responsibility, about ESG, what are their needs, but at the same point of time, we are trying to give them feedback about what they could do, what we could offer, what is out there to bring in, okay? Because we are speaking for the islands, okay? We are serving islands from 300, 400 people to 350,000 size. There's different knowledge in there, different communication, even in the era of internet with the outside world. So the idea for us is to be, it's a two-way approach. We get from them, they affect us, but we are trying to educate them, to give them back, to tell them what is out there, what they could do better, what we can do better with them. Okay, so that is more or less how the way we work.
Yeah. Okay. That's. I mean, it's interesting, and one supposes actually that education piece to your passengers is important, because ultimately there could be changes to their, so you provide an essential service to the islands, etc., and there could be changes to those services as a consequence of, let's say, the decarbonisation agenda, and they need to be part of that journey, so to speak.
Yep.
GAUTAM, just moving on to you, and obviously we have LR are doing a great job in assisting clients through the decarbonisation transition and the regulatory landscape. However, I mean, the regulatory landscape within the industry is complicated enough right now. And as I highlighted in my introduction, there is a lot of uncertainty about what the midterm may look like and what the obligations of the industry may be as a consequence of that. But the industry is also now grappling with a range of industry-led initiatives to drive decarbonisation and as a consequence, transparency. And I'd like to ask, how is LR supporting clients not only through the comprehension of the regulatory landscape, but also those external pressures, if you like, which are now being placed on the market?
Yeah, thank you. Take this opportunity to thank Maritime London and good afternoon to all the participants and the panel. Thanks, that's a very interesting question. At LR, we, through our business advisory teams, we engage with our clients, educating them and informing them on of course, the upcoming regulatory insights and also the trade industry requirements, and also assisting the clients in de-risking their trajectories towards carbon neutral. So we at LR, being you can say a repository of information and a knowledge partner, we also assist in assessing the mega trends for the clients. What are the system level requirements, be it again from the regulatory or the likes of Poseidon principles or the Sea Cargo Charter, but also understanding what are the ESG, what are the valuations, what are the you can say the integrating the valuations in the upcoming, you can say the project investments and also the portfolio construction. So if a ship owner or a bank or a port or also a ship operator or a charter is coming up with a project for investments, they would normally approach LR in order to understand what the risks are and what the implications will be. Also at LR, we provide strategic advisory services encompassing all the current regulations, but also commercial and technical due diligence. If you're looking at the ship owner's value chain, right from capital structure onto capital budgeting or a working capital requirement. Initially, if you are going to acquire a fleet of ships, then of course the vessel acquisition, you need a climate performance for the financial institutes to be able to invest and make an informed decision. Similarly, with regard to designs for vessel acquisitions, what are the next generation vessels will look like? What is the technology out there? What are the future fuels out there? And then what are the redundancies or other risk mitigation that you need to build? And similarly, from vessel acquisition, you also got vessel operations and management. In this space, we also have our LRDS, our digital tools and capabilities to ensure safety and compliance, but also performance optimization, taking a life cycle view. And with the last bit of recycling, when at all it should be done, what are the implications, what are the cost of obsolescence to avoid any stranded assets on the balance sheets and so on. And if I may take the opportunity also to share the initiatives by LR in terms of the Maritime Silk Alliance, where we are bringing in, as I said, diverse partners from across the value chain, how we can work together in the sense, it's when such an ecosystem is created, things are no longer abstract, they are more granular, they are more tangible, questions and answers in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of aggregating the learnings, also bringing in the research institutes and so on. So providing an overall perspective and more visibility to the ship owners from the regulatory bits, which we see like the EU ETS and other fuel maritime EU, but also the industry, you can say the requirements from various stakeholders, be the financiers or the cargo interests. Yeah, thank you.
And just to build on the Maritime Silk Alliance piece a little bit, and again, I think thinking about the expectations of external stakeholders on the industry in terms of how the sector decarbonises. Obviously, we've seen shippers like IKEA come out with very ambitious decarbonisation targets across their supply chain. I think they're talking in the level of 80% reduction by 2030, which is a mere 7 years away. Now, obviously, shipping, the vessel, I would suppose, makes up quite a significant component of their overall emissions exposure, so to speak. To what extent are you having those conversations around those external pressures impacting the industry? And if you like, the potential of the market having to go above the IMO trajectory in a relatively short time in order to keep the shippers happy, I suppose.
Thanks. Actually, we've had numerous discussions with across the value chain, as I mentioned, with financiers and ship owners and so on. But what we've also observed is it's not only the asset owners, but also the charterers and the cargo interests who are pushing for a decarbonization. This is more towards a scope 3 emission. So it is actually, yes. And also we've seen it's not just the maritime, it's cross-industry, the power generation. We would also have seen participation in terms of generating the green renewable molecules. And then also the grid operators, it's not just the generation, but it's also the electrons should be made available for a P2X kind of a concept where you're using power to generate renewable methanol or ammonia. So yes, it is across the value chain, and it is because ESG, if I may say, is not just seen as a tool to mitigate the transition risk, but it is much more because companies high on ESG are seen to have a high growth and a high valuation. So overall, we are seeing a lot of pull in this direction. Of course, there are solutions out there in terms of technology, in terms of availability, and so on that needs to be seen, and that will be peculiar to each shipping sector, be it the cruise or the container. Certain sectors are more, likely to transform earlier than others, where it's more tramping trade. So it all different strokes for different folks, but eventually we see, yes, a large commitment and a large, you can say, convergence of a trajectory towards reduction, heading towards carbon neutrality.
So GAUTAM, you sort of, and I may have misinterpreted what you're saying, but now obviously this isn't true of every trade within the shipping industry, shall we say, but I suppose those who embrace an ESG, a proactive ESG policy, if you like, are at a competitive advantage in the market. Is that a fair appraisal of a fair synopsis of what you were saying?
Yes, indeed. I would like to emphasize that, if you are having an ESG excellence in performance, so it's not just, as I said, a tool to arrive at or manage the transition risk. If you look at companies stronger in ESG, they have a more robust top line. They have a stronger B2B and a B2C relations. Also, they have a stronger community relations and government. Also, if you come down the income statement, so as to say, and you're looking at the cost part of it, companies stronger in the E part of it, or even ESG, they are managing their resources well. There's less of wastage. Energy efficiency is higher. So the OPEX element of it, or is more, you can say, comparative as with other efficient companies. And if you are further looking down in terms of a productivity boost, the stronger you are in ESG, the more talent you can attract in terms of people who are looking to work for similar companies with a similar strategic outlook. So that also, and there are so many other factors I could list, but then of course you attract finance in a reasonable cost of capital. You will get some basis points off in your borrowing costs, and then also in terms of other regulatory and other legal requirements. You are kind of shown some exemptions by the governments, companies who have a more stronger ESG agenda and are practicing. environmental and social and governance. So also, if I may add here on the social bit of it, also we have seen companies who are identifying and managing their impact on the societies as a whole, not just from within the company, but also certain companies which are influencing the ecosystem. So many container and cruise companies are having biodiversity and destination partnerships outside their regular employees. So being stronger in social, and of course we talk about diversity and inclusion, and so all these points put together do add tangible value to the company, not only in terms of goodwill on the balance sheet, but actual performance and actual operational profitability. Thanks.
Nikos, to sort of come back to you on that point, I suppose. I mean, you referenced when you spoke last time about the fact that for numerous reasons, perhaps both reputational and regulation related, Western financial markets have not been the richest of hunting grounds, if you like, for large parts of the shipping industry. Now, from an uneducated point of view, I would suppose, you could suggest that the enhanced ESG agenda will compound that situation. But GAUTAM is suggesting, in fact, the opposite in a way. And those owners and operators who are unable to embrace change may be at a competitive advantage. Is that a fair appraisal of the situation as you see it?
Just yes, and of course every responsible company would be, I think EPAMEINONDAS actually referred to this, a responsible owner, a responsible company would be doing work anyway. Are we causing a revolution here? No, it's an evolution, right? And this is what I try and keep saying to everybody that I discuss this with. And also the energy side, the environmental side is a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. So what we're seeing is, and the reason we feel that we are actually quite successful, we're raising the capital, is because there's a story here, there's a narrative. And as an industry, we have a positive story to say. Look at us here now. I think up to before 2017, nobody was discussing ESG in shipping. This wasn't an acronym that we even knew. 5 years, 6 years down the line, it's, as I said before, on our thoughts, on our minds, and in discussions everywhere, every day. There's an evolution, therefore. Yes, the new designs. Yes, the alternative fuels. Alternative fuels as an industry is out of our hand, right? We need infrastructure. We need other players to play their role. Engineering-wise, technology-wise, we're there. We're ready. We could do it if the bunkering capabilities were there. We need to have a look at the shipping industry and maybe split it up in groups. There's different ship types. You can't just put every ship type in one group. So what I'm trying to say is this ESG discussion supports our discussions with investors, also supports the fact that you have to have a very specialized and knowledgeable team talking to investors, deciphering, translating what's happening, because to an outsider it sounds horrifying what's going on, that the ESG discussion in combination with the regulations, the continuous regulations, is a barrier, right? Potentially could be a barrier. We know, as I said before, that there's been lack of investment in new builds. The shipyard, the order books are down by 10% from a 55% that they were a few years back. That's a combination of reasons behind that. One is to do with ESG. One is to do with owners, with investors not happy with investing a large percent of their equity and getting a loan against unknown fuels, unknown engine types, and et cetera, et cetera. But as I said, there's an evolution. So we as both financiers and owners are in a privileged position to see both sides, to see everything that's going on. And when we're running a second-hand fleet, because as Hayfin, we have purchased in excess of 80 ships in our years of existence. We're currently running a medium-sized fleet of second-hand vessels. Why I'm saying that is because there's an issue now. What can we now do to improve, and therefore show the evidence and achieve the KPIs, achievable, realistic KPIs, to our stakeholders. And I think in our discussions, going back to your question, if you present correctly, if you show what the industry is doing, which again, I'm very proud of our industry, the shipping industry. I think we are at the forefront of major changes, and we're discussing things that other industries haven't discussed yet. There's a lot of geopolitics that are involved. There's a lot of other factors that are out of our control. But as far as us, if you have a team that's knowledgeable, understands what's going on, and takes it step by step, then the investors are there, because it's it always has been an attractive industry in terms of returns.
And just sticking on the sort of the external pressures, if you like, changing and progressing the ESG agenda within the market. GINA, just to focus on the P&I club world for a minute. I mean, obviously P&I clubs are owned by their members, and therefore, your role within the club, I assume, is to provide advice to your members around ESG best practice, etc., and ensure they are best placed to achieve compliance both now and into the future. But we have, from an insurance perspective, seen things like the Net Zero Insurance Alliance come into being recently, etc. And to those ends, to what extent is the reinsurance market making ESG disclosure demands on the club, and how easy is it for the clubs to satisfy those disclosure requirements?
Well, the first thing, I think you very correctly illustrated, our role as a P&I club is more of an advisory role. However, I feel, it's quite important through this transition period, because given there's so much uncertainty and the risk of change, it's very important for P&I clubs, and at West especially, we've given so much focus on it. Obviously, with me coming on board, we have an internal ESG committee, and we make sure that our experts are ahead of the curve and there to support and assess the risk, consult our members when it comes to new technologies, new solutions, seafarer well-being, and the rest. So I think that's there is a very important role for P&I clubs in this respect. And when it comes to answering your question on external pressures and the reinsurance market, so at the moment, there are some initiatives that are going well, that are going ahead, as you mentioned, the Net Zero Alliance and obviously the Poseidon Principles of Marine Insurance. But there's no clear signs at the moment of how the reinsurance market will be approaching it, or when, for that respect. It is a bit of a $1 million question, which I get asked a lot. But I think as far as capability of adjusting to this or transitioning into this, I mean, screening processes are always in place in P&I clubs and at West, and they're quite stringent. Or new accounts, existing accounts are always renewed when it comes to renewal period, reassessed, when it comes to renewal period. So they are in place. We also sit on the sustainability committee of the international group. So we always want to make sure, that we're well ahead of what the next steps will be, whether from the reinsurance market or any other external influences to our business and operations. So I think it's been proven in the past that in that capacity, we can adjust to the market requirements or changes without any issue. I think as P&I clubs in generally, the most important thing is just to follow these developments closely, collaborate with the rest of the industry and subsector, of course, just to continue enhancing our knowledge and partnerships. We recently also became a member of the Maritime Anti-Corruption MACN. So that's one thing, and just, being an example and leading by example for our members, inspiring them to do more through our charity partners and what we do. Because I think another important element we have to prepare for, we're focusing on the new ESG reporting standard, and there will be down the line the C3RD, which that focuses completely on organizations' global impact. So for us, I think it's just, telling that story, inspiring members, being there to support them. And when and if and how the reinsurance market will be approaching is just being ready to transition smoothly through that change.
So currently there are no clear signals from initiatives such as the Net Zero Insurance Alliance in regards to how that may impact on their respective books, I suppose, their reinsurance books. But you're preparing yourselves for a potential change in that, and obviously working through the IG, etc., to ensure the market is in a solid place to respond. Is that a fair appraisal?
Well, I think that I was in this briefing the other day on the Poseidon principles of marine insurance, and one of the people there said, it's the way forward, and whether, this is the initiative to follow or not. Looking into portfolios and more screening requirements, ESG requirements, it's just the way we're moving. So without doubt, I think you just summed it up spot on as to what the future holds.
And we've got some questions coming in on the chat. One of them, I think, to be honest, is a webinar all of itself. But GAUTAM, I'm going to go to you quickly on this. Now, obviously, we have lots of people joining this webinar from all different parts of the market, and some potentially, GAUTAM's disappeared. So I think he's not up for the question. But Charlene, what we will do is you've asked quite a big question there in terms of the legislation and the enforcement mechanisms which are currently in place in the market. And what I will do is, I'm sure that Lloyd's Register have a lot of materials focused on that, and perhaps we'll be able to send that out later to you in the form of an email or something along those lines. So with GAUTAM now gone, and hopefully he will return at some point. But Epaminondas, moving to you, I think that obviously the global economy is not in a particularly strong place at the moment. Within the UK and across the EU, individuals are feeling that in their pocket as a consequence of rising inflation, etc. And I think as a consequence of that, I think, we're seeing in the UK anyway, perhaps, where decarbonisation and the environment was front and centre in a lot of individuals' mind, if we're honest, keeping the heating on has become the imperative. And transposing that onto the shipping industry, I suppose, and the situation may be different in Greece. I mean, obviously, you don't need the heating on quite as much as we do here, but how much?
But they need air conditioning.
They need the air conditioning. Yeah, that's it. Very true.
So if you're talking about energy consumption, that's heavier.
That is true. But to move this on to talk about shipping per se, how much of the market is still driven by price? And do you feel that your consumers are willing to pay a little bit extra to ensure that the industry is delivering, or Attica is delivering in terms of its environmental obligations?
Well, we have researched that. The last question, actually.
That's very good.
Among the community and our passengers. And I think the answer is more or less the same all around the world. Nobody's ready yet to pay something more for this kind, for ESG, for the environment, for social, whatever. I think they are not ready because they have not seen yet themselves the actual benefits. Something you have to convince. That's why I said at the beginning we try to educate the community. You have to convince the people, and they have to see, what is behind that, what is the benefit, and then, because at the end of the day we are all people, okay? Our decisions are driven by certain motives. And you have to educate them. And at this point of time, the majority is not ready to pay. So, and we are not ready to price the whole thing. Okay. We are not there. I think nobody's there. Maybe I will speak with Nick afterwards in a more private chat, how you can price the efforts someone is doing, how a financial institution or a fund is pricing, and the ESG effort a company is doing, and what it will gain in terms of not doing anything. Okay. But that's another debate. But I will tell it plain and simple. People are not ready yet. We've done our research. We've asked them several times, and the majority is not ready. And our job is our duty to educate them and persuade them that at some point they will have to, and they will benefit from that, and we will benefit from that. So it's the value of both of those things will be split among the company and the stakeholders. Okay.
But so in that context, and in the context that, you know, at least currently, particularly because they're unable to see the direct benefits, if you like, passengers might be unwilling to burden any additional costs. What hope do you have of the EU ETS and the derivative fund from the EU ETS to be able to smooth that curve out for your customers?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think, again, we will have to wait and see, won't we? There is a lack of clarity there, right?
Exactly. I can easily make whatever assumption you want. It won't be fair, neither for me nor for the audience. So the ESG answer is I don't know.
Sure. Well, no, I think that's fair enough. Now, I think there's been far too much consensus on this call so far, and there hasn't been enough grist in the mill. And one thing that if I were a ship owner or a ship manager or someone at the end of the value chain, if you like, within the shipping industry, I would be sitting there relatively concerned about the way in which the discourse around the ESG agenda is developing. And I say that because whilst I think the decarbonisation trajectory in the short term is uncontentious, and there is an understanding of, or maybe not uncontentious, but at least there's an understanding of what short-term compliance looks like. When it comes to the social and governance elements, I wonder whether there is a good enough sort of objective understanding of what good looks like in order to keep on the right side of your investors and your insurers, etc., and those people external to the industry in terms of being able to comply with their ESG criteria. Would that be a fair concern if I were a small to medium-sized ship owner? Or perhaps there is that criteria for what good looks like in terms of social and governance within the shipping industry. I simply don't know about it. Gina, why don't we start with you on that question?
I would say that is something that I actually get asked quite often, frequently, on how you can set KPIs, I guess, when it comes to the social and governance aspect of it. I think, well, one step forward will be the EU ESG reporting regulation, because that's going to come into place and it's going to create a more globalized standard. I mean, I think I've read more than 100 sustainability reports, and they're all quite different in what exactly they're saying and how they're saying when it comes to social and governance, especially. I think, though, it's probably more common sense things and things that probably, I've said this at the very first interview when I joined West, and probably the things that good owners are already doing. I mean, we're one of the most highly regulated industry in the world. The good owners do take care of the crew. There's regulations in place for that. So I think when it comes to these kind of measurement criteria, it's quite straightforward for me. It's a simple equation and you can't really put a metric to it, but you do know if you're doing better. I think a key focus is probably things that have been lagging behind a bit in embracing them in your strategy, like talent attraction, retention. I mean, we haven't been telling our story quite well, so that's an important thing companies should be looking into. And when it comes to seafarers' mental health, a key thing again is to probably understand that that has to be led from shore and from leadership, and making sure that your crew is in a position that they feel as if they're working in a more normal environment, because that effectively, has to illustrate also in your operations. So that's my take on it, at least.
Does anybody else on the panel have a view on that potential issue? Because if not, sorry, EPAMEINONDAS, yeah.
I would like to say two things. Okay, I don't know what, but good or bad. I am from those kind of guys who are just 5 years from the shipping. I come from other industries, so some things seem to me a little bit peculiar when I entered the industry. So yeah. And I've been to several industries. I've been to telecoms, to financial, retail, etc. And I would say what should look good. Okay, in terms of governance, good is transparency. Okay, Nick mentioned it at the very beginning, and we talked about it a little bit when we did the meeting, the prep meeting the other day. Transparency, very important, which is not on the top of the agenda on the maritime industry. Okay, and when they are forcing you to do something, most of the times you are not doing it well. So the second thing from the social side is DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion. Again, I feel this is an area in maritime which we are not very strong, meaning we are lacking from other industries, we are behind. When I entered the industry, I was amazed. I saw an association of promoting women in the maritime. Yeah, you are laughing, I guess. In the maritime sector, they don't have such an association in no other industry, and I was curious why it was that. I found out at the end, and I spoke with a couple of people over there, and they explained me what exactly is going on. So two things. Look, that you want to look good, transparency on the governance side, diversity, equality, and inclusion on the social side. That's from my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, so can I just quickly?
Yeah, of course, Gina.
Yeah, I mean, he's completely spot on the diversity element. And as I said in the opening, it's an important fact of leading even decarbonization. You need innovation, diversity, and inclusion. But that comes back to, I mean, it was the first time that voluntary company related their loan to gender equality targets. And this is 2023. So I think that in itself says a lot. But very well done to Navigator Gas. And I was just listening to the podcast of the CEO, and it's amazing, how he stresses the importance of this.
If I just add to it, EPAMEINONDAS, under that very key conception of transparency, a subgroup is honesty as well. We have to be honest with each other. We have to be honest with the stakeholders, the investors, in what is achievable. You will not change the world in one day, but what can each of us do within the role that we hold in this amazing industry? Right?
Yeah.
And that means more collaboration. Everybody has to play their part. For example, and I'm going to be very fast, when we talk about technological advances, when we talk about investments, green investments, there's a capex involved, right? And we have to find that balance of eco and eco. I've always said it since I was in RBS. Ecological, but economical. It has to make sense, right? And everybody has to play a role. We still, unfortunately, from our side, we are lucky enough as investors and as owners to have the capital to invest in our ships and wait and negotiate with the charterers afterwards. But, and I mentioned charters and I shouldn't have done, I wanted to keep it neutral. We all have a role to play. We all have a real role to play in this evolution, in evolving our industry and making it cleaner and more transparent.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good sentiment, Nikos. We are running out of time rapidly. And just maybe to build on what you were saying about collaboration, etc., Nikos, we have a question here from Danny McGowan regarding the SVSG. Now, My sense is, and I'm not in the front line of this, but my sense is, particularly in the context of the ITF, the industry has the mechanisms to work collaboratively with the trade unions. However, one supposes that in many ways they are the voice of the workforce of our industry. And does the panel feel that there's more that we can do to proactively collaborate with the trade unions to ensure that we understand what the seafarer themselves are thinking on these issues?
I would say yes, obviously, Josh. This is what I'm talking about, collaboration and openness. Yeah. We can all do our bit, and we do our bit, and we have technical managers that have their own policies and procedures and benefits, etc., but we go in and above and on top of that. And so, yes, maybe we need at that level as well to be a formal discussion being held.
Gina, sorry.
I would just say definitely collaboration across the industry is very important, not just with the unions, but I think a very important thing that I always like to stress is that leadership is the key to this ESG transition. It all comes from there. And I noted, I think NIKOS mentioned their ESG committee. And something I would like to say at West, we also have not only reporting to the board, but there's an ESG committee from across departments and across level of employees, because they're also your change agents in this process, and you need them, even more junior staff, feeding into what's practical, what isn't practical, because at the end of the day, it's a business. So leadership is key, and definitely collaborating with across stakeholders.
So if I may, to support, sorry. To support what Gina says, yes. After 2002, the Enron collapse, Americans discovered the phrase tone at the top. Okay, if you want to show good practice, look at the top of the company, always. Well, here in Attica, we are very lucky. The last 20 years, we have a CEO who actually started the whole thing of corporate responsibility. He was a visionary on that. But if you want to see something good practice in governance, look at the top. Who gives the top? Hey, then everything else will come.
I think so. GAUTAM, welcome back. Nice to see you again. You were missed just as I was asking you a question as well. It was almost like you had it planned. I don't know, but just do you have anything to add on this piece? I know it's not your explicit piece of expertise, but you looked like you wanted to come in a second ago.
Yeah, I see when dealing with various, shipping stakeholders around the value chain, we've seen, of course, good governance right at the top with board level committees and trying to one of the impetuses of ESG is to balance the short-term gain, which looks, with the long-term benefits. So it is very easy to fall into the trap when you're doing something in terms of saving immediate costs, but then of course you are harming the company growth and valuation in the longer term. So that was my point of view. And also, with regard to seafarers, you can say we have now the MLC, and we also have the various shipping companies are looking into how can they do the recruitment and the retention, advancement, and the representation of the seafarers, on more wider issues and not just on the vessel. So all these things are heading towards a positive, various aspects of the ESG that we see are coming up with various companies.
I think the last question I want to ask, and this goes back to EPAMEINONDAS and NIKOS's point around honesty in regards to the industry, I suppose. And, there is a lot of things that this industry does very well. And but one of the things I do wonder is, obviously, we are a deeply international industry that operates in every jurisdiction all around the world, with an incredibly diverse mix of cultures working on board our vessels. And I think it's fair to say traditionally male. But against this backdrop, how easy is it to transpose what could be described as a largely Western-centric ESG criteria on the sector? Here I'm explicitly thinking about EU reporting requirements, etc., because we're not going to be able to change that labour force, and there are economic priorities, etc., which are at play within those labour supplying countries. We're not going to be able to make these changes overnight, I suppose. And in that context, what what should people be doing? What should owners and operators be doing right now to show that they are at least moving along the right line? Gina, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge, and we see this regulation, especially in respect to decarbonization, between EU and IMO, and there's always this conflict. And the thing is, I think if we take, for example, the new reporting standard, it's going exactly beyond EU. It's going to affect more than 10,000 companies outside the EU,
Yeah.
and that was very similar when GDPR came into place, and there was, this panic and everything, but it kind of found its course eventually. I think ESG, while predominant in the Western world, I mean, I've been in Qatar and Dubai the last 2 weeks, and I've seen it's been on agendas. It's there. It's being discussed. In Asia is the first investor, if I'm not mistaken, who takes ESG criteria in their investment processes. So I think it's something that it will become more global and have a more global understanding and standard. And again, comparing it a bit to the Data Protection Act. So it will be there. What companies can do, the three things, I think it's make sure just that ESG really feeds directly into your board. It's very aligned to your business strategy. You have a clear vision of it, and coming back again to the committees, both from your senior level, but also across your organization. But we just need to understand that we're in this new era. You're not hiding. It is a global thing. I mean, social media is a global thing, and the new stakeholders are really into sharing whatever's going around the world. So I think there's no hiding, and it will be aligned eventually in some way or another, with some minor maybe alterations, but that's the only way it's going to work. So companies might as well embrace it and see it as an opportunity to write or rewrite the narrative than having it written for them.
Does anybody else have anything further to add from that excellent sort of appraisal of the situation, Gina?
I think if I add both Gina and EPAMEINONDAS' previous comments, the company has to be fully committed, and then the company has to share, as EPAMEINONDAS was saying, with the clients, the passengers. The company, as we do at Hayfin, is share our knowledge, embrace it, explain it, and move for that improvement in performance of the assets you invest in. Whether the investor, for example, in our case, has the agenda item ESG top or 10th on their list, it is what we do and what we can do. And everybody, that's why I say everybody has their role to play. If you feel passionate about it, and I think we all do, and we all agree on that in principle, it is our role to empower and support this within our networks.
I think that's I think that is a good. Unless GAUTAM or EPAMEINONDAS, you have anything further to add? GAUTAM, is there anything from you?
No, I think as rightly pointed out, I agree with the fellow panelists. The standards and the follow-up are heading towards a convergence. It's not going to be that a particular pocket, is going to be trailing around. As with any global initiative, be it, heading towards a decarbonization, it will only work if all different economies, geographies, and sectors, are going to pull this together. Not only the maritime, as I said earlier, even the adjacent industries, the production and the power generations and so on. So I think we see some positive developments here. Yes, companies are up to speed, and also the entire ecosystem, if you will, the upstream financiers, or we've seen also the institutional investors, asking for this, and that is irrespective whether you are based in whatever part of the world, it will impact. So it becomes more imperative, and also, as was pointed out earlier, it's so important, to balance the transition risk, and if not done properly, we'll have a larger physical risk later on in terms of the whole, in terms of the global climate temperature rise. So I think this needs to be done and will be embraced as the projections show. Thanks.
EPAMEINONDAS, anything from you? Well, we seem to have lost your sound, EPAMEINONDAS.
Okay, sorry. I feel that, we are okay. I feel that we all know that the E part has a very long way to go. a very, very long way to go. The S and the G part, the answers are out there. I would advise maritime industry to get out of maritime. See what other industries do. Get knowledge inside and implement the solutions, implement the actions based on the maritime needs. But, okay, see, because we can't go forward on social and governance issue, because the part has a long way to go. At least let's see significant progress over there and benchmark yourself not with other maritime companies, but with companies outside maritime. That would be my closing statement.
I think to look outside the industry and understand what's going on in other sectors and take learnings from that and understand where we can do better. But also, I think, perhaps as Nikos was saying, there are things that other industries can learn from the shipping industry. And we have moved, my view is over the past 3 to 4 years, not only in the decarbonisation piece, but if you look at so many of the initiatives which GINA is spearheading, on the diversity and inclusion piece as well, I think the market has work to do, but obviously some things to be proud of as well. I would like to finish because we are 7 minutes over time, and I know that GINA has another meeting to be to, and I think another of our panelists has as well. I'm not quite sure what's happened during the past hour, but expectations in terms of what the main driver is for change have changed significantly according to our polls, with access to finance now going from 21% in the original poll up to 38%, and decarbonisation regulation, which was by far the leader in the original poll, now only accounting for 11% of our on-air listeners. I'm sure there is a balance to be struck there, but that's quite an interesting appraisal as to the key takeaways from this webinar today. I think this has been a really interesting discussion, broad and far-reaching. We've touched on most of the pressure points in terms of ESG within the shipping industry. I think there's some areas with which we can go and drill down in a bit more detail in the future. But I really enjoyed this hour. EPAMEINONDAS, obviously the sun is shining with you in Athens. Unusually, actually,
we have a corporate party at 7 o'clock, to tell you the truth.
You need to get your party. And to be honest, I might sort of take on some of my own ESG advice and go and enjoy the sunshine now as well, because you've got to make the most of it when it's sunny in the UK, and it's Friday afternoon after all. So on that note, I would like to thank all of our panelists for a really interesting session and taking the time, and also for everyone who's been listening today. And I wish you all a very good weekend, and thank you again.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.